Welcome to Atheism. At least that's our tentative title for this podcast. I'm William Garrison, and this is Michael Ani.
Hello.
And we're here today again to discuss our lack of belief in a god or any gods, and basically hash out what that.
Wait, does that mean all of them?
All of every single. I don't know. There's 5,000 plus or whatever.
So I can't.
I've seen a list.
I can't keep one as like a pet.
I've seen a list.
You're saying I have to jettison all of them.
I think we can idolize them.
Can we?
We just don't.
Because I think anyone who's got an elephant head and multiple arms is kind of cool.
Like this bobblehead right here.
Jack Skellington is my god now.
We can say he's awesome, and we can say that he brings us inner peace. But I cannot, with good faith, assert that he created us and everything in the universe, because I know that's not true.
But then if Jack Skellington did not, in fact, create you for a purpose, why are you here?
That's what I'm trying to find out. That's my quest as an atheist.
And that is my attempt at a lead-in.
So one of the segments we wanted to start doing, we're going to call it right now, ongoing segment on social media, just like the name of this podcast, that is subject to change.
It flows nicely, I think.
Flows off the tongue. It's like a natural Jamaican waterfall, since I was in Jamaica recently, actually. I know what those waterfalls are like. They're beautiful. The water's clear.
Okay, stop bragging.
Pretty amazing.
Some of us had to stay here.
Pretty much a baller.
Yeah.
One of the topics, or at least things that come up on social media, specifically in Twitter, because I'm a very active Twitter user. You can follow me on Twitter. My hashtag is William Garrison, all one word, and he's Michael Ani on Twitter, all one word.
Yes. And that's A-U-N-E, since no one has any idea how to spell my last name.
Never heard of that word before. Ani? Is that like awning? Do I have it over my porch?
Let's not go there. You're bringing up 27 years of problematic last name spelling. One
of the things that comes up on Twitter, at least that I see randomly, is for some reason people believe that atheists are Satan worshipers, which we wanted to kind of call out for the record for those that didn't know. Atheists don't believe in God or any gods.
Or divine beings as a general rule, which kind of rules out their evil counterparts.
Yeah.
So you usually don't have one without the other.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a all or nothing proposition. It'd be different if I acknowledged higher beings and then chose to worship an evil one, as opposed to saying the entire concept is null and void on its face.
So I think this comes back to a culture thing. For some people, it's cool to be offensive to say that I worship Satan, or to say that, or to write 666 and spray paint on a wall, and it's the mark of the beast, and that's who I follow as a divine figure. But
I just figured the beast would not be so interested in numbers and math.
And more of the brimstone and hellfire and the torture. But we just wanted to get that out there. That's something I see on Twitter occasionally. And if someone is a true atheist, then they theoretically don't believe in Satan.
Going to another favorite social media medium, I guess we would say. Reddit has been kind of on fire, especially in the atheism subreddit. Reddit, notorious as it is, it's interesting to kind of get the pulse of where at least the internet atheist subculture seems to be leaning. And right now, politics and religion are the hot button topic. I've actually got an article on the site you can go to, two different ones actually, on the innocence of Muslims and why David Barton should matter to you, which kind of touch on this, basically discussing why the community is so up in arms about the intermingling of politics and religion and why that can be such a volatile and dangerous combination. So check those out. Hopefully they're worth reading. I certainly like to think they are.
Yeah.
It's just been interesting with the election season, seeing how with the mentions of, legitimate or illegitimate rape or anything coming up, which touches on the whole abortion debate and, all those things that go hand in hand with typically religious belief.
Which, by the way,
the community react.
We don't think rape is funny.
No.
What we think is funny is that certain Republicans, we're not going to go out on a limb, it's not all Republicans, it's certain Republicans have said publicly that rape is part of God's plan, that it's something that he intended. Not only do we not believe that, but we believe that comments like that shouldn't be made by politicians to try to somehow squash the discussion of rape and maybe the topic of abortion, which is, I think, is how it initially comes up.
Which is
rape is a horrible thing. It can be explained no more than bad people doing bad things.
Yeah.
I don't think you can point at a God and say he intended on that rape to happen, because that's not what Michael and I believe.
Well, of course, we don't believe that, though, because we abolished the entire premise. But it's interesting that in some theological circles, and these are not out there circles, we're talking Calvinism, which is a fairly well-established branch, and basically any of its offshoots, anything that kind of gives God full control over human destiny, the idea that the fate of people are predetermined, would in fact logically entail that, yes, it is God's plan and God's will that you are in fact raped. And I think the abhorrence that people have to this notion is important, because I think that is your better judgment coming out against what is an obviously horrible idea, that your loving God and Creator would put anyone through such a traumatic experience and then justify it by saying, well, it's for some greater good. And I think that initial reaction that people have against that, and why all these politicians are backpedaling, his position was not necessarily incorrect from a theological standpoint. It was not something that says, well, if God knows everything that will happen, and God intended for these things to happen, and rape is one of those things that happened, then it was
I think it was more the thing that it was an obviously unpopular stance. At least, people didn't want to hear it aloud. I think even if...
But that's the important thing.
Yeah.
People didn't want to hear it out loud, because people don't want to, I think about the fact that it's hard to reconcile those two belief systems. The idea that there's an all-knowing, all-powerful God who's fully in control.
Who cares about our lives.
And, I mean, this has been something that's gone back for thousands of years. People have tried to figure out how it is that bad things can happen and yet not hold God accountable for those things. And I think that it's incredibly interesting that most people's initial moral reaction, almost in the face of what they've been taught, is abhorrence and rejection of the notion. It's one of those things that you almost can only come to intellectually, to where you could acknowledge, based on what I believe about God and the tenets of my particular religious tradition, that this is in fact the logical outcome, that God did intend it. And I think when you have that interesting divorce between, in a sense, your moral gut reaction and what you then have to publicly say is true, I think that undermines the whole notion that religion is a fundamental underpinning to morality.
Yeah, and I think most theists, or most people that believe in a God, whether you're technically religious or not, I think they would say that it's a test from God, that some of our human instincts are wrong, and that to fight those is doing God's will. But again, that's something that atheists fundamentally disagree with, because we feel that that's our inner nature telling us what's right. We think that morality,
it's our humanity, in a sense, coming through.
It's inbred in us. It's wired into our brains.
Yeah.
And we think that's an important distinction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's something, I think, about the natural empathetic response, which drives people to feel for one another, which that, to me, is the underpinning of morality. It's not that there's a particular set of guidelines or an outside force that we are trying to live up to. I think there's a reason why I don't want to see suffering ever. I don't want to see an animal on the side of the road in distress. Something at my core reaches out and goes, this is bad and I want to stop it. And I think it goes back to simply how we have evolved as social creatures. And it's not that there's a right or a wrong to that. It's not that it's right that we feel that way. But I think it is fundamental to who we are as people. And as a result, trying to divorce that from the moral scope here and say, oh, well, that response is not in fact appropriate. It's supposed to be this cold but logically consistent based on these religious texts.
Yeah.
That's where this cognitive dissonance comes in, and people they don't want to think, and they go back to that gut reaction of just saying, this is terrible. I don't want. How could anyone ever say that? When in reality, it should be prodding a deeper argument. It should be forcing you to acknowledge that these beliefs are difficult and there are consequences to them. And too many people believe it's as easy as loving Jesus and walking out the door. And it's not. It's simply not. And the thousands and thousands of people who have struggled with these things for 2,000 years now, I think are testament to the fact that your belief is something that requires work, requires defense, requires intellectual exercise, and if you're not willing to do it, you're being disingenuous in your belief.
I would agree.
So
totally.
There's that.
That's actually kind of funny how that word atheist gets thrown around, and I'm not against it necessarily, but it's like a discussion I was watching on Twitter from an actual atheist. He was talking about his mom, who calls anyone that doesn't like to participate in Christmas and Halloween, they're a Halloween-atheist.
I'd like to note that I am not a Halloween or a Christmas atheist.
Yeah, we actually, like participating in most of these holidays.
Traditions are important.
Traditions,
it's a way to feel connected to your past and your present too.
Culture,
being with family, and
really, and that's what he just said. That's the most important thing, at least for me, is being surrounded by people you like and love, drinking beer, chatting about crazy campfire experiences or cruises that I recently went on. Those are things that we like to discuss. And
you like to discuss.
Going back to our point earlier of empathy and human solidarity and caring for your fellow human, it goes into conversation. It goes into our topic of atheism and the fact that one of the reasons why we're trying to be vocal and what we want to do with this podcast long term is we want to have conversation with people that believe and maybe give them ideas of why we don't believe. And if they are willing to make that journey, if they are on the fence about their beliefs and they want them to be tested, whether or not it's to either further increase their belief or if they think they might become atheists, then we're more than willing to have those conversations. We think it's important.
Well, I think, too,
to be vocal.
It's not easy in society, any society, when you're a minority. Like, you are basically forced to justify your beliefs, I think, that much more than the other person. If you're part of the status quo, no one really asks why. But we, as atheists, although we are a growing minority at this point, which I'm very pleased about based on some recent surveys I've seen, we are still very much misunderstood, misrepresented by outside parties, I think, because we're not a cohesive group. Atheist is it's an incredibly pointed term. It only means one thing. And so all of the other connotations that tend to get tied up with it about being immoral or loudmouth, none of those things hold. It's just does not believe in a higher power, like a divine spiritual being.
It's like comparing it to being called a theist. If you believe in a god, you are called a theist. But literally, that ties you to every other person that believes in any god or gods. Yeah. The Greeks were theists. Muslims are theists. Jehovah's Witnesses are theists. Your set of beliefs are completely different when you actually pinpoint it to a specific religion. Atheism simply means no belief, no religion.
It cannot be clarified enough because it's constantly misunderstood. Atheists are not a group. We are a group only insofar as we hold the same non-belief.
Yeah.
There's no positive belief that we adhere to that says, I believe that Jesus died for my sins, was resurrected on the third day, and sits at the right hand of God. Those are things that define a creed and define your belief structure. Mine is simply the very basic premise of a belief structure, but it's a negative premise. It doesn't define it. It puts boundaries on it, but that's it. So the way that I've had to fill in the ideas of what it is to lead a moral, fulfilling, and important life in light of the fact I don't believe in a higher power that's given me a purpose and a goal to my existence. Those are all things that I have to flesh out myself. And my belief system and William's belief system.
He sometimes calls me Billy.
Middle school habit, forgive me. Any other person, I cannot tell you how varied the agnostic and atheist beliefs are that of the people I know in just a small circle. And these are people I'm very close with. And you would think we would be more on the same page. So I think it's very important to recognize that atheist denotes something so insignificant for defining a group that to throw it around in any sort of definitive sense is a waste of time.
Yeah. We use the term atheist to describe ourselves partially, to start conversations, to show how important it is to us that we're labeled as atheists.
It's a quick label. It's easy. It's convenient. But
well, and it's because we like public discussion. I think if we were more in the dark or in the shadows and we didn't want to have these awkward conversations about religion or things that would lead in people hating us just because we don't believe in their divine being, then we would call ourselves agnostics, which most people consider, oh, you're still religious, you're just a little unsure. Or we just wouldn't tell anyone what we believed in. But rather than that, most atheists are fine at least mentioning that they are atheists publicly. So that brings us to kind of a quick conversation about where we envision this going, especially now we have an awesome logo poster behind us that Stephen Akins made for us.
Yes, the man behind the scenes.
The man behind the scenes.
Quite literally,
made the poster
he's
behind
the
us,
camera right now,
staring at you and us. Some of our future plans include doing segments like the ongoing segment on social media that we quickly touched on earlier. We're going to do reviews of whether we read books, watch movies, see debates online.
Good articles.
Things that we might want to quickly mention that we would link in the comments or on YouTube directly.
Or maybe Twitter.
Yeah. We'll push all of our social media avenues as well. We have other future segment ideas as well, like Interview with a Theist. That's another tentative title, but there are people in our lives that are either on the fence or that do believe, that are open to some very basic, friendly discussion that give you at least a good idea of the people that we do surround ourselves with.
We'd love to hear from you. Comments. You can contact us directly through the webpage.
There's a contact link at the top.
Things that you'd like to see, topics you'd like us to discuss or touch on, or even specific questions maybe you want us to answer.
Yeah.
Given what you know of us so far, please do reach out. You can hit us up at Twitter as well.
We're 37G TV. 37G was already taken on Twitter, so we're at 37G TV on Twitter, and then our website 37g.tv is where you can either directly contact us or find the link to all of our Twitter accounts and so forth from there.
Or hit us up individually. Again, Michael Ani,
William Garrison.
Yeah.
And thanks again for joining us.
Yeah.
See you later.
See you next time. Sure.
Did you just find that or something?
Poke you in the eye.
Guys, my dad wrote me back. I'm the luckiest son in the world.
Hey, you know that quote that I said was awesome? This doesn't mean I have nothing to live for. It means I have nothing to die for.
No.
Yeah, Ricky Gervais retweeted that. That's how awesome it is.
Yes.
Oh, no. Don't mess it up.
I knew it was going to break at some point.
And we're done.
It's a good one, guys.
Cool thing, we can cut out giant pauses like this. I love it.
Really?
Yeah.
Can't do this.
You can, but that's going in the after credits. And you vomit.
Terrible idea.
You just regurgitate all of the Bud Light Lime into the bottle.
It would probably.
That's how they package
it.
It
would probably
actually
taste better.
I
didn't choose the beer. I'd like to note that it was William here.
Stephen Colbert chooses Bud Light Lime, and
as much as
awesome.
he is a god amongst men, I would say I do not believe in him in this instance. I am atheistic with regards to Stephen Colbert's choice of Bud Light.